Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, the Russian-European deadlock. And has this woman, the so-called Queen of Europe, got the keys and the steel to unlock the crisis over Ukraine? Time's running out, sanctions against Russia are mounting, and that may not be a good thing for all of Europe. Also this week, how to stop the snoopers from governments to foreign intelligence agencies. Is your internet traffic secure? We'll show you how people are fighting back in this digital age. And making money from the internet. Germany's rocket internet has a business model which builds on the success of others. We talk to the man taking on Uber and Amazon in the Middle East. So we're back to Russia this week, but with a different angle. Because Russia's isolation and that of its leader Vladimir Putin is well documented after the Ukraine crisis. But we want to look at what, or indeed who, could reverse that. If something doesn't change, Russia will be sanctioned up to its eyeballs. Add that to the falling oil prices and it could be in recession. But that's not necessarily what all of Europe wants, even though Putin's treatment at the recent G20 summit in Brisbane would suggest otherwise. He was snubbed by a slew of world leaders there. Not that it changed his attitude, because Putin, like many Russian nationalists, believes it's the West's expansion which undermines its borders and security. But there are parts of Europe which can see the sense in talking to Russia, namely Germany. Chancellor Angela Merkel had the longest meeting of anyone with Vladimir Putin at that G20, and there's a belief she could be the key to unlocking some sort of strategy to deal with Russia. After all, Germany is the nation with the most to lose. 350,000 jobs in Germany are linked to trade with Russia. Trade between Russia and Germany stands at about $104 billion. You've also got more than 6,000 German companies with registered offices in Russia, a combined turnover of 40 billion euros, employment of 270,000 people. And German companies have invested 22 billion euros in Russia itself. So no surprise then that German companies are lobbying against stronger sanctions over Ukraine. Well, the short story is that Germany is Europe's kingpin. It holds sway. And Angela Merkel, who lived under communism in East Germany, remember, probably understands Putin's mindset the most. It's a mindset that's led to economic retaliation. You sanction us, we'll sanction you. Like in Poland, one of Russia's former satellites, which is feeling the pinch of sanctions brought against Europe by Russia. Ali Velshi from Al Jazeera America has this report from Gdansk, an example of what can happen when Russia bites back.
These Polish apple farmers are on the front lines of an economic war raging between Russia and the West, sparked by the real war in Ukraine. Polish apples became a casualty after Moscow slammed the door on most agricultural imports from the European Union, a tit-for-tat response to Western sanctions slapped on Russia. Russia is inflicting major pain in this farming community, an hour's drive south of Warsaw. Orchards for as far as the eye can see grow this, the famous Polish Gruwitz apple. It is delicious. Poles love these, but so do other people. In fact, in 2013, Poland exported 677,000 tons of apples to Russia. That's 56% of all its apple exports. But that all ended on August 1st. There's nobody to buy those apples now, and that's going to cost Polish apple growers $659 million this year. And that panic over apples is a symbol of much bigger fears spreading across a European continent whose economic health was already turning rotten. Putin holds a huge weapon in Russia's economic war with the West. During the 1980s, Moscow built a web of pipelines linking its Siberian gas fields to gas-thirsty households and industries in Europe, using Ukraine as a transit state. That means Europe today is vulnerable if Russia turns off the spigot. In a bold attempt to fix that problem, Poland is taking the most aggressive action of any European country to free itself of Russia's energy dominance. Poland expects a major liquefied natural gas, or LNG, terminal to be built by the middle of 2015. Now, that'll help Poland wean off the 10 billion cubic meters of natural gas that it imports from Russia. About half that amount of natural gas will come into the new terminal by ship. I sat down to discuss it with former Polish president and Cold War icon Lech Walesa. Poland has had this experience where the gas from Russia, from Gazprom, starts to flow a little bit less. Do you think that's going to happen this year in Poland and in other countries?
Proszę pana, jeszcze chwilę, a będziemy...
Just a few more months, years, and we'll be completely independent of Russia. Russia will lose out because we and others will not buy. Now, we're not able to do it, but we will be in the immediate future.
It's all part of an economic war that has planted seeds of discontent from boardrooms in Berlin to apple orchards in Poland.
So let's focus on those boardrooms in Berlin, or indeed the corridors of power there. Jan Randolph's joining us from London. He is the Director of Sovereign Risk at IHS. Thank you for your time today, Jan. Just how important do you see as the German-Russian relationship, and in particular that of Angela Merkel and what she's able to, I guess, make happen with Vladimir Putin and with Russia?
Well, I think it's fairly clear she's absolutely central. She's the go-to person when it comes to dealing between Europe and Russia. I mean, that's based upon the fact that the Germany and Russia have the biggest trading relationship with each other. That goes back several decades. But it's also the fact that Angela Merkel speaks Russian. She comes from the old communist East Germany, and they have a long-running understanding relationship. They've spoken to each other many times, more times than anyone else, and that remains in place. So she's the go-to person and the main person to talk with Putin.
But it takes two to tango, as we say, and Vladimir Putin has not been willing to tango with many people recently, it seems. I mean, do you actually see her having some success if she went to Moscow and talked directly to him?
Well, she's always maintained the door open for talks. Sometimes it hits the sand. It's obviously going through a very rough patch at the moment over Ukraine. In many ways, Merkel sees this as an affront to what Europe is about. The idea that you can move borders through the use of force. Europe more or less decided that is for the dustbin of history. And this was not part of what Europe was about in this new century. So she's drawn a red line here, and she's got the whole support, really, from the rest of Europe. Even though sitting on the fence, she managed to corral, as part of the coalition of the willing, in terms of putting these sanctions into place and ramping them up. And she's absolutely keyhole and gatekeeper when it comes to the position on sanctions. But yes, there was a rough patch at the moment. But she's also, part of sanctions is also carrots and sticks. And she held open this possibility of a much longer-term, wider deal with Europe and Putin's so-called Eurasian Union, which is his equivalent of an EU.
You mentioned the trade history, the business history between Germany and Russia, and we've looked at it in our programme as well. Just tell me a bit more about that and whether you think it can survive these current rocky times.
Well, it's absolutely essential. The biggest exporter, Gazprom, gas, but also oil, goes to Germany. It keeps Germany warm. It feeds the chemical industries there with feedstock, and also powers many of the power stations. And that's been in place since the late 70s. The Soviet Union laid the so-called Friendship Druzhba pipeline to West Germany. It's the single most important source of foreign exchange for the Soviet Union, and it's also now for Russia. It has never been interrupted, and they've laid additional pipelines, gas and oil, since then. The Russians have always paid on the nail, and they've never interrupted the flow of gas or oil. It's absolutely essential, the most important trading relationship. And built around that, of course, you've got German exports in terms of capital equipment, high-end consumer goods. On top of that, it's a two-way relationship.
You've said it's a two-way relationship, and yet Vladimir Putin has got his feet stuck in the ground. He's not moving, and even with all the sanctions being piled on, why is this so important to him that he doesn't want to move? And when I say this, what is this? What is his end game here?
It's a good question. Everyone's trying to read Putin's mind at the moment, but there is a pattern to what's happened, I think. Putin feels as though the biggest geopolitical disaster was the collapse of the Soviet Union. He's been desperate not only to resurrect the Russian economy, but the Russian state. And that includes maintaining spheres of influence in the former Soviet republics. Many of them have left and redirected their economies and trade to the West. I'm talking about the Baltics now. But he wants to build his own Eastern EU, the Eurasian Union, which includes Kazakhstan and Belarus. But Ukraine was absolutely central here. I mean, without Ukraine, it didn't make any sense. It was a really big former Soviet republic, really important in terms of industry, very important supply chains going into Russian industry, including the military-industrial complex. And without Ukraine, his grand plan of a Eurasian Union would basically fall apart. But we've seen what happened since. A year ago, the political upheavals, previous government trying to deal with Russia. Basically, Ukraine was running out of money, foreign exchange, and it was playing financial poker between Moscow and Brussels, and ended up the previous government deciding with Russia, but the people on the ground didn't like it. And this is where we are now.
Where do you see the Russian economy going, Jan, and its current trajectory with the sanctions in place and, as we mentioned before, the falling oil prices as well? In its current state, where do you see it going?
Well, downhill. The question is how far and how fast. But it's interesting to, 3 years ago, the Russian economy was already slowing, below 2% growth. And the Russian central bank came out with research papers saying our export surplus is going to disappear in 5 or 6 years without a new investment climate to bring in new investment. And that was before a slowing China. That was before the falling oil price. All that's just made it a lot worse. And then on top of that, we've now got sanctions. So the Russian economy is faced with multiple hits from different quarters. But yes, the falling oil price, down 25, 30% from its peak mid-year, is probably the most potent sanction there is, on top of what the Europeans are doing in terms of their so-called smart sanctions on individuals and certain parts of the industry.
Very well put. Jan Randolph joining us from London this week talking Russia. Thank you so much. And now also, the Russian oil giant Rosneft and the banking group Sberbank are both attempting to overturn sanctions in the EU courts. And it is a situation with precedent. Iran's Bank Mellat managed to do just that. And we're going to talk to a man who represented them. It is Sarosh Zawala from Zawala & Co. Solicitors in our London studio. Sarosh, thank you for your time. Tell us about your experience with Bank Mellat. How did it go? How did you get to a point of success there?
It's been a great experience so far. I've also visited Iran as part of my instructions taking from client. And we took on a case which was very, very unpopular. We won in the Supreme Court, which declared that the sanctions were unlawful and irrational. And we won in the European General Court, and now we are expecting a result on 29th of January from the European Court of Appeal.
Okay, can you explain to our viewers what it was that made that, or what decision was that made it unlawful, or what was the other word you used?
Irrational.
Irrational, right. What was it that brought you to that?
The Supreme Court said that the listing of Bank Mellat was first listed by the UK government in 2009, and subsequently in 2011 and 2012, it was the EU Council on the recommendation of the British government which listed Bank Mellat. And the Supreme Court, after a 3-day hearing before 9 of the total 12 judges, said that it was irrational because there was no evidence that Bank Mellat was involved in supporting nuclear proliferation activity. The reason why Bank Mellat was listed was because it was an allegation made by the UK government it was supporting Iran's nuclear proliferation activity, and the Supreme Court found that it is not the case. The Supreme Court went into a secret court session where we were not allowed to be present, and heard the evidence from the intelligence agencies. And after that, even after that, the Supreme Court said that Bank Mellat was not involved.
So then how much of
and that's the reason why.
Sorry to interrupt you, Sarosh. How much of a victory would you call this, or how strong do you consider the victory to be? I just wonder if the European Union can still find its ways to keep the pressure on sanctioned companies and individuals, and if so, how much of a victory this represents?
It was a victory, and I'm told that the State Department in the United States is very, very concerned because the Iran government, the Bank Mellat now has a claim of $4 billion damages. And I know that in the court, at least in one hearing, United States representatives were present, and that was confirmed by the Counsel for HM Treasury. So it was a serious victory, and the final victory we expect is the EU Council's appeal, which was heard in September, and we are expecting the Advocate General to give her opinion on 29th of January. Now, if that happens, then the Bank Mellat will have to be delisted.
Does this thing, in the end, kind of prove or perhaps highlight the fact that sanctions don't necessarily work? That a group like the European Union can go into a situation like this, they can attempt these targeted sanctions, but in the end you can never 100% go after the cause of it all. You know, other people will always be affected.
Absolutely right. In fact, the sanctions, I take the view that the sanctions are in breach of the human rights and the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which every member country has to sign to get a seat in the United Nations. And that provides that the state will not injure any human being, which includes any legal entity, without a due process. And therefore, I believe that this is completely unlawful. And if targeted entities are listed because they are supporting the the governments from their earning, then all the taxpayers in that country should also be listed because they are paying income tax, and that could be used by Iran for nuclear proliferation activity. And I think there is now a general recognition coming around from in the West that the sanctions are really unlawful, and we are really challenging it in many other respects too.
Sarosh Zawala joining us from London on Counting the Cost. Thank you for your time, Sarosh. Now, is your government spying on you? Well, it's not for us to say, but let's say there's been plenty of conjecture in the last year or so that this sort of thing is happening, a lot more than we perhaps initially thought. Well, now there's a free tool to help you find out more. A group of human rights and technology organisations launched something called Detect, which scans for spyware which is often missed by antivirus programs. Julie MacDonald explains more.
Governments, law enforcement and intelligence agencies worldwide are said to be spying on everyday computer users. There's mounting evidence the practice is being used by some countries to target political dissidents, journalists and human rights advocates. Bahraini opposition activist Saeed Shehabi is one of its victims. Campaigning against human rights abuses in Bahrain, he not only endured a series of attacks on his home and his colleagues, but also on his computer here in Britain.
I think that's devastating. When you know that you have no privacy in your life, when you feel that as if you are walking in the street without your clothes on, because someone else is monitoring your movement, you feel really, really frustrated.
The spyware is so powerful, it can take over the user's entire system, sending emails, switching on cameras and tracking every keystroke. It can then be used to discredit victims and be removed without a trace.
They were saying that you are tweeting things that do not conform to your personality, such as, for example, sending links to pornographic sites, which I never did. So, and we were serious about it, looking into it, why and how it happened. But we always thought, well, it's a virus that came and it did this, until I realized that it was not the case.
But now victims of cyber spying can fight back. Detect is a new public software tool that scans devices picking up on spyware that regular antivirus programs can't find.
This is what's so terrifying about this kind of spyware, is that it goes way beyond what has been traditionally surveillance capabilities around listening in or interception of communications, and it is actually getting the information right at its source on your computer. This is really a bespoke piece of software that's been developed to find and pinpoint traces of that spyware that we know is being used against activists.
So for now, it's a battle between those intent on protecting activists online and those creating programs to help governments stop them.
Julia MacDonald there with an example of something that's made it to fruition in the tech world based on, essentially, a strong idea. Which is what we want to explore with our next guest, a company called Rocket Internet, which is taking on the world's big online retailers and such by, well, copying them, sort of. Dr. Iyad Al-Qasr is with us from Dubai. He's the co-founder of Rocket's Middle East joint venture, which is called the Middle East Internet Group. Iyad, so many things we can talk about with regards online and privacy and entrepreneurship, etc. I do want to start with Rocket itself, because you're essentially repurposing and retooling ideas for different markets. So you're using other people's ideas. Do you, and this sounds a bit awful, but do you have your own ideas, or more to the point, if you're using the success of another brand, how do you build your own success beyond that?
So What we reuse is basically not like super innovative ideas. Yeah. What we do is, for example, selling fashion over the internet, as we do in Namshi in the Middle East. That's not like a big invention. It's like an idea implemented in many places in the world, in the Western world, and established markets. And we are taking this to the emerging markets. Yeah. Or for example, Amazon's principle. It's not, nobody will tell you like Amazon is like itself by itself selling items via the internet, selling electronics on the internet is a very innovative thing. Yeah? But the implementation, the execution of it, building the infrastructure, that is the real work, and that's what we are doing all over the world.
Okay, so what do you do then in a sea of technology and startups and apps and social media? Give us some of your tips for spotting the good ones from the not so good ones.
So what we believe is in serving basic needs of people. Yeah, we believe there's a huge revolution going on basically all aspects of life. Yeah, you have it from purchasing when you buy your electronics, when you buy your fashion online, when you want to have a car, when you want to move from place A to B. There is where we see always the biggest opportunities and where we are moving to. Yeah.
Okay, interesting you talked about going from place A to place B, because that is a very current topic with the Uber taxi service. What do you make of the controversies surrounding that?
I think whenever a new technology arises and it leads to more efficiency in the market, all players, etc., like are hesitant or like objecting it. But I think there is no way that this new technology, especially in coming from one place A to B, will finally be the standard. Yeah. So there's Uber, there's Easy Taxi, for example, we have in Saudi Arabia, and this is really making life easier.
What about the privacy issue, though? Because we've seen this with Uber, how much data is being collected and then used, and it extends beyond an app like that too. You know, it goes into the whole world of online privacy. What are your, again, concerns there?
I think they're valid concerns, and I think they have to be addressed in the right way by the companies to elevate the fears of the customers. For us, it's very clear, like for taxi and other companies, that privacy is key. Yeah, especially in emerging markets where you have basically all the concerns on rights, on security, on the security of the passengers, etc. So what we believe in is the companies themselves have to take care of this. At the same time, the regulator has to come with clear indications what is required and what not.
Just a final thought, Iyad, on the whole industry you're in. It is, if I can be very broad brush here, it is very much a young person's game. You know, you're 30 years old, you're clearly successful, and it makes us all jealous to see that. But does it need a few more older hands in there? Not quite saying parental supervision, but some people who've been around business a bit longer, know the pitfalls, the legal issues, and have that experience to pass on to these talented younger people.
So what we believe is that there's really a revolution taking place. Yeah? People are moving their services away from what we have seen traditionally so far, from offline shops, from offline calling a taxi, from offline ordering food, etc., to the internet. Basically, therefore, we need a clear new mindset to address them. At the same time, there are also problems which have been solved already by the traditional industry, and where you have experts which have done this for years and years. And so in our teams, for example, at Namshi, we are combining both. So when we look into fashion buying, when we have like the people who decide what will be trendy in the next season, what inventory we should buy, we have people there with experience, people who know the market well, who are working in the industry for a long time.
That is Iyad Al-Qasr joining us from Dubai this week. Thank you, Iyad.
Thank you very much.
And that is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/programs. The Counting the Cost page has individual reports, links and entire episodes to catch up on. And down the right-hand side is the social media feed with people's comments and feedback. You can join that by tweeting either me at KamalAJE or our business editor at Abid Oliver Ali. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.